So San Francisco's offense, Kansas City's defense. This is not the more interesting matchup of the two, but it might be the matchup that does determine the actual outcome of the game more so than the flip side. I know that everybody's excited to see Mahomes versus Sherman or Mahomes versus Nick Bosa in this front, but I think the more interesting side of the football that could dictate the outcome of the game is going to be this side of the football. Now, because I'm a Patriots fan and I'm an absolute lunatic, I went back into my mind and thought how each team could prepare as if they were Bill Belichick. As I always do, I always look through the lens of the game. What would Bill Belichick do? WBBD. And Bill Belichick, obviously being the greatest coach of all time, I think you should look at the way that he would approach the game. So that being said, how would Bill Belichick attack the Kansas City defense? And also, how would he prepare for this game? So Kyle Shanahan is really in an interesting spot here. I think that San Francisco should, to compare it to a New England game plan, should take the New England versus Peyton Manning approach. And what do I mean by that? I think that San Francisco should have long, sustained drives where they try and keep Mahomes on the sidelines and intentionally keep him sipping Gatorade so that he has less time with the football. Now, I know that Mahomes and the Chiefs are not a team that necessarily need a lot of time to score a lot of points, but I do think that in a course of a Super Bowl where there's long quarter breaks, there's a long halftime show, there's a lot of waiting around, there's all the commercial stuff that goes on. You get very antsy if you're on the sideline, and the team with possession of the football, obviously in football, is going to win more often than not, but the team specifically in the Super Bowl, I think, has a major edge, the one that can hold on to the football for a longer period of time because of all the extra things that go into the Super Bowl. And I do believe that if you're going to beat Mahomes, you want to limit his possessions and limit his time with the football. And I think that comes down to a core fundamental philosophy that San Francisco needs to take into this game, which is he's Peyton Manning, we're the Patriots, and we need to keep the football away from Peyton Manning, and we need to keep him sipping Gatorade. So the Chiefs, what I found interesting about this game plan is they allowed the most plays per drive this season. So the Chiefs, even though their defense has been improved this year, and even though their defense has played very well at times this year, they actually, on average, allowed the most plays per drive this season, which means they were on the field for the most plays in a given drive on average. And they also had the third most time of possession allowed. So San Francisco, statistically speaking, should be able to hold on to the ball for a long time and should be able to run a lot of plays versus Kansas City, because that's exactly what happened versus Kansas City. Now, you also have to take into account that, like I said, Kansas City is a team that often scores quickly when they do score, and that means that Kansas City's defense is on the field for longer. But that being said, Kansas City is not going to change the approach that they play. They want to play fast. They want to up the tempo. And if you're San Francisco, you need to reverse that. You need to play slow tempo, and you need to keep the football and go for a lot of plays. And obviously, you want to score as quickly as possible. But I think with San Francisco, and you're not going to just lie down if you have a wide open touchdown. But what I'm trying to say here is you want to keep the possession, because you want to force Kansas City to be in rush mode, to be in come from behind mode, even though they've been so successful in that regard as of late. Now, a big key in this game, I think, for Shanahan will be his play calling in general, but I think it will be the play calling in the first two downs. Because I think where San Francisco has the major advantage is in those first two downs of play calling, and I think Kansas City might be the better team on third down or have the advantage on third down. Now, I think if San Francisco can avoid third down, I think they will win this game. I think they need to attempt to come in with a game plan where they're playing CFL football, first down in two downs. So I think whoever wins this game on the early downs, specifically on this side of the football, will win the game. I think depending on the play calling and the schemes on both sides, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this comes to be, basically. So Spagnuolo versus Shanahan. Now, when they get into the red zone, I find it interesting. San Francisco's only 21st in the red zone this season. Kansas City is 9th on defense. So if Kansas City is in the red zone, they were good versus Tennessee. They were mostly good versus Houston in their red zone defense. Kansas City has done a good job of really limiting the points and making the opposing team kick field goals, which I think also is going to come into play for Kyle Shanahan, because I think he's going to try and go for fourth downs more often than not when he does get the opportunity to. So look out for that. Now, a big question on everybody's mind is, can Jimmy G step up? I think that's on everybody's mind. A lot of people are saying, Jimmy G isn't the guy. He can't do it. He can't pass versus Kansas City. He can't be the guy to win the Super Bowl because his team only runs the football. I've heard that a lot, and it's almost like annoying at this point. When I look at Jimmy G, I don't think he's the best quarterback in the league. I don't think he's a top 10 quarterback in the league, but I do think he's a good quarterback. And some statistics that will show you that he is a good quarterback and that he can step up in big situations. First off, he had multiple fourth quarter comebacks. He had multiple game-winning drives this season. Look at the Saints game. Look at the Rams game, for example. Seahawks game. Some of the biggest games of the 49ers season, Jimmy G played his best in, which I find very interesting. And also going back to his days even with New England, me knowing kind of what the player he was, I really liked him because of his ability to step up to the occasion. And I think Jimmy G is a quarterback that does play better when the lights are brighter. Now, statistics to show you that when trailing, Jimmy G is actually first in yards per attempt and second in passer rating. Now, it's not a huge sample size because the 49ers only played 175 snaps when trailing this season, which isn't a lot, but first in yards per attempt, so he's throwing for deep plays down the field, and he has a really good passer rating, so he's not throwing interceptions when they're down, he's being more effective, and that's really good. That's clutch time. And I think another thing to show is that when the 49ers have needed to pass to win the game because their running game isn't as effective or maybe they're trailing, Jimmy G, 7 games with 250 plus yards. They're 7-0. So Jimmy G has won every game this year when he's needed to step up and throw for 300-ish yards. They've been able to, and they've won the game. So for people out there saying, I don't think Jimmy can do it, I don't necessarily know if it's Jimmy who can't do it. I think it might be the fact that I think we'll get into it. I do feel like the 49ers offense is not as good as a unit when they're put in situations where they have to pass, because that's not the type of offense that Kyle prefers to run. But I don't think that is all on Jimmy. I do think that's a way for Kansas City to be effective, but I think that's going to take a lot for them to do because it's so difficult to force the 49ers into a position where they're only having to pass from the shotgun or only having to look deep down the field for their passing plays. That doesn't happen unless they're losing by 20 plus points early in this game. That's likely not going to happen. Now, looking at the matchup between Shanahan and Spagnuolo, Shanahan is 5-1 in those games. His worst game came with 34-year-old Donovan McNabb when in Washington. If you watched my Kyle Shanahan video, I appreciate you, but you would hear that what the players he had on Washington, they weren't very good, and McNabb was pretty bad when he was in Washington, if you don't remember. Also, go check that video out if you haven't already. In those games versus Spagnuolo, his offenses 8.7 yards per attempt. That's very good. I would say anything over 8 is considered very good. 4.3 yards per carry is pretty solid. I don't think that's excellent, but solid. And 24 points. Again, solid. And I do think Shanahan this team is a lot more talented than the teams he's had in the past, but also the Chiefs, or I would say Spagnuolo, this defense kind of lines up on average with the defenses he's had. I think he's had some better defenses. He had some worse defenses, but they're about in the middle. I do think that Kansas City is one of the better defenses, Spagnuolo, in terms of talent that he's had, but I don't think it's like the best. And I don't think this is the best offense Shanahan's ever had, but it's one of the best. Now, Spagnuolo does have experience in the Super Bowl as a coordinator, and so does Shanahan. Now, Shanahan did a great job game planning versus the Patriots, who had the number one defense in 2016, but also Atlanta had one of the best offenses of all time. So it's hard to take into account, how amazing he was. But he was great in the first half, and the Patriots offense was steamrolling the Atlanta defense in the second half, and some courses of events happened, and it was unfortunate what happened to Atlanta. I personally think, now this is hot take city because I think some people blame Shanahan for the loss. I think he made the right calls. I think the execution was poor, and I think New England was just better. That's period, end of story. I don't think that they did anything particularly bad. Now, maybe they could have ran the ball one play and kicked the field goal, but I feel like that's still very conservative, and New England could have still won the game regardless. But I will say that Spagnuolo, when he's reached the Super Bowl, he had one of the best game plans in Super Bowl history in Super Bowl 42. So this guy, he comes up in the big moment in the past versus the best offense ever and has one of the best performances for a defense ever. Now, he doesn't have that defense that he did in 07, but if he can have a similar game plan or a similar great game plan like he did then Spagnuolo, you should have faith in Spagnuolo that he's not just going to get out-coached completely. I think this is why this is such an interesting matchup, even though he's kind of struggled versus Shanahan in the past, which was what makes it so interesting. Now, and also Shanahan wants to redeem himself for the end of Super Bowl 51. Now, I think the big matchup everyone wants to know is, will San Francisco be able to run on Kansas City? Well, stats would say yes. When you look at the stats, San Francisco's second in yards per game. They're second in yards per attempt. And when you look at Kansas City's run defense, 29th ranked in DVOA, 28th in yards per attempt, 26th in yards per game. It's not very good. But they've been better lately. They only allowed 89 yards to the Titans, who Derrick Henry is steamrolling everybody. But I do think part of that was because they were losing and they had to pass, and they only got, I think he only had 3 or 4 carries in the second half. So part of that is not necessarily the Chiefs' defense, it's more the Chiefs' offense, which we'll talk about later. But the Texans, they also did a great job versus the Texans. So I was trying to look through any trend that came up, but it was really difficult for me to figure anything out. Henry only had 3.6 yards per carry. The schemes are different, though. I do think the 49ers will have more success than the Titans did. I do think the 49ers can run for over 100 yards in this game. And I think if they do, that's going to go a long way to making this game. They're going to score points if they do. I don't necessarily know if that means they're going to win, though. I don't know for sure. But I will say, I think the scheme of Shanahan and all the little things that they do is much more complicated and complex and tougher to defend than the Titans. Especially a Titans team who was coming off 2 hard battles in a row, a running back who had 60 carries up to that game and probably was run down and tired. And the 49ers are not going to be out of the game most likely the way that the Titans were, so that it would take Henry out of the game. But I don't think that Kansas City will get completely steamrolled the way the Packers did, or even at times the Vikings did. I do feel like Kansas City is a better defense in that regard than those two teams were, and do stand a better chance at defending San Francisco, even though the numbers would say throughout the season that they are worse than those teams. Maybe Green Bay was worse, but it's hard to know. So, looking at some of the other key statistics, I have so many, it's crazy, but looking at Kansas City's defense, they were really good in terms of not allowing deep passes. I think they're the best team defensively as a secondary, not allowing passes past the sticks in a completion percentage sense. So any passes 10 plus yards past the sticks, Kansas City has been really, really good facing those passes. Now with San Francisco, they are also interesting because Jimmy G has really feasted with a low percentage of deep passes, yet being the most effective in that regard. So Jimmy G, even though he doesn't throw a lot of deep passes down the field, 49ers and Jimmy throws a lot of short passes, but they're the most effective team when they do decide to go down the field, and that's because they're often off of play action. No quarterback threw more play action passes at a higher rate than Jimmy G, 31% of his passes. The lowest depth of target this season for a quarterback, yet the only quarterback to reach 8 yards per attempt. Then you look at the leading percentage in YAC. So Jimmy G's yardage had the most yards coming off of yards after catch. So I think that's a big matchup in this game is Kansas City going to tackle well? Are they going to come up and defend these runners? Because like I said in that Shanahan video, he's made an offense that is all about what you can do with the ball in your hands. Deebo Samuel, Emmanuel Sanders, Raheem Mostert, Tevin Coleman, Matt Breida, George Kittle. All of these guys are very good after the catch. And that's probably their strength as a passing game. Kansas City ranked 29th in defending teams after the catch. So San Francisco does have the advantage there. But if Kansas City can come up and stop and defend better in that regard, they have a major chance. Because like I said, early downs will be key. So let's say Jimmy G throws a 5-yard pass on first down to Kittle. Let's say, play action maybe. I don't know. Probably going to happen at least once or twice, right? If Kittle breaks that first tackle and makes that 5-yard catch a 10-yard catch, I think San Francisco, and that happens more often than not, San Francisco is going to be in great spot here. But if Kansas City is able to limit that 5-yard gain, which stats say they're not very good at, then I do feel like Kansas City can win the game very easily. Something also San Francisco does is they are very quick to throw the ball. They're 7th quickest snap to throw in football. Now, the big key here for Kansas City's defense, I think, is going to be the players in the middle of the field. Tyrann Mathieu, Daniel Sorensen, Hitchens, their linebacking play in general, Wilson, and specifically Tyrann Mathieu. I think Tyrann Mathieu is going to have to be probably borderline MVP in this game if San Francisco's offense is going to be ineffective, right? If Kansas City's defense has a fantastic historical performance, it's because Tyrann Mathieu was the best player in this game. And the reason I say that is because San Francisco, the number one thing they want to do in the passing game is target the middle of the field. The Chiefs, because of Tyrann Mathieu, ranked number 1 in defensive DVOA on passes over the middle of the field. Short, middle of the field passes. Tyrann Mathieu is usually the robber in the middle of the field. If he's not covering people man on man, he's that robber in the middle of the field, playing zone, trying to pick passes off in the middle of the field. And I think his instincts and ability to prepare for this offense and be able to instinctually tackle, make plays on the ball, and break up passes is going to be absolutely huge. I also think that Spagnuolo is going to have to flood the middle of the field in a similar way that he did back in 2007 versus the Patriots to take away guys, to take away those type of players. So I think it's going to be Mathieu. He needs to have a huge game, and maybe even Sorensen as well, who's been playing better as of late. I don't think he's like an upgrade over Thornhill, but he's been playing solid in replacing him. Now, something interesting about Mathieu is that he pretty much plays everywhere. I mean, he plays slot corner, he plays free safety, he plays strong safety. No safety was asked to cover wide receivers more often than Mathieu, and among all of the safeties, he actually was 7th in yards per target and had the second most passes defense. So he does make a lot of plays on the ball. He's been an all-pro this year. He's been a fantastic player. And just remember Tyrann Mathieu. If they have a good game, if Kansas City wins, Tyrann Mathieu will be a big part of it. Now, I think one major issue and something that San Francisco could exploit is the running back matchup in the passing game. And this is why I think Tevin Coleman will be the main running back for San Francisco. I think this because Kansas City ranked 32nd in defending running backs in the passing game. They played some games where they played Aaron Jones, for example, who, by the way, Matt LaFleur came from Kyle Shanahan, under Kyle Shanahan, and he had the best game all season versus Kansas City. And Kansas City ranked last in defending running backs in the passing game. Tevin Coleman is the primary pass catcher, Matt Breida a little bit, but Raheem Mostert less so. So I do believe that Tevin Coleman will be the guy more often than not on most downs, and I think Mostert will be second, Breida third. But that's just my opinion on how they'll split their running back usage in this game. So I think a lot of Tevin Coleman props should be good to take, especially catches or some sort of receiving prop would be smart to take. But I do believe that Tevin Coleman will have a big game in the passing game, and I think that Kyle will have plays to attack the linebackers and that matchup in the passing game. Kansas City also ranked 28th versus tight end, which we know is not a good thing when you play San Francisco because George Kittle is the best tight end, or if he's not, he's second. So he's really, really good, and that's not a good thing. And I also wonder who are they going to... Kansas City plays more man than San Francisco does, so they're more of a matchup-based defense. I do wonder what Spagnuolo's plan will be, but like I say, I do believe that it needs to be to pack the middle of the field and force Jimmy on passing plays to throw outside, or just more often than not, your play calls packing the middle of the field. The difficult part of that is that San Francisco uses so much motion to maneuver their offense in ways that they can attack the middle of the field and maneuver your defenders around to take them out of the middle of the field because Kyle's so smart. And then also their primary run play is outside zone. So if you try and pack your defense in the middle, you're going to allow outside zone. So it's kind of pick your poison. Do you allow Kittle and do you allow Samuel and Sanders to get open over the middle of the field, or do you take away the outside zone run play? So I don't think you can take away both every single play. That's why Shanahan is so smart, and that's what he does at such a great level. Now, I also think a bad thing for Kansas City's defense is that they're not good versus motion, and this is because their linebackers are their worst part of their defense. The middle of the field defenders moving side to side. So if San Francisco determines to use motion, which they do the most in the NFL, by the way, that will, I think, stress out Kansas City's linebackers because, one, they're not very athletic, and two, I don't think they're very smart compared to the safeties or the corners of Kansas City. I think Kansas City's corners, Kansas City's safeties, they are much better than their linebackers, especially in coverage, obviously. But I think when you're looking back at this game, if San Francisco was getting the ball to Debo, Samuel, Coleman, and Kittle, and less so to, let's say, Sanders and Bourne on the outside, I think that's where they win. So if you see that Bourne and Sanders are leading the 49ers in receiving, I think that means Kansas City probably won the game. But I think if you see that Coleman and Kittle and Samuel were leading the 49ers in receiving, 49ers probably won the game. Because I think that tells you whether or not the outside was being attacked or the inside was being attacked. And why I'm being so over the top on this is because Kansas City was first versus receivers this season all year. Number one over New England, over Baltimore, over San Francisco. They were number one versus wide receivers this year. And not only that, they were top 10 in rating, top 10 in yards per game, top 10 in touchdowns as a secondary. They forced the fifth most interceptions. But Jimmy G, that is his weakness. That's his weakness. He wants to pass over the middle field. Kyle wants to pass over the middle of the field. But Garoppolo is not great at throwing outside the numbers. Now, he only had 94 attempts to receivers outside, so he doesn't even do it very often. But he ranked 25th in the league on those attempts in expected points added. And then he also ranked worse than Mitchell Trubisky, who was the only quarterback to produce a lower number of expected points added, but he had a higher success rate. Mitchell Trubisky had a higher success rate on throws outside the numbers than Jimmy Garoppolo. So that is why I'm stressing that Kansas City needs to force outside, not inside, on these big passing plays, specifically on third down when you know 49ers are going to pass. Right? Because you don't know on first and second necessarily if it's second and 7, they could run or they could pass, right? But if it's third and 8 and plus, you know they're going to pass. They're not going to run that draw every play like they did versus Green Bay, right? So, and that is where you want to try and take away those throws. But why that's also huge, again, stressing this again, Garoppolo led the league in expected points added on throws inside the numbers to the slot, the tight end, or the running back. So this is the game. If Tyrann Mathieu, Daniel Sorensen, these linebackers ball out and maybe they get a pick or they force incompletions in the middle of the field or they just take away the throw, the first read of Garoppolo, Kansas City will win. I also think a guy that San Francisco could target is Fuller. He's been playing a little bit more safety as of late, but he's allowed 130 passer rating. So whoever he is covering, I think you want to attack that guy. You probably want to stay more away from Ward and whoever he's covering. But that's something that Kansas City does do more often than San Francisco is match. So you might see Ward on Samuel or Sanders, and you might see Breeland on Bourne or I don't know. But Breeland usually plays on the outside. Ward plays kind of both, and then Fuller mostly plays in the slot. So if Fuller is in the slot, I do think that does open up the opportunity for San Francisco to attack the slot if it is man-to-man, because he's been the worst out of all of them. Now looking at the pass protection versus the pass rush, which is also a huge thing on both sides of the ball, but for San Francisco's pass protection versus Kansas City's pass rush, which nobody seems to be talking about, everybody's talking about the opposite side of the ball. Kansas City, this is why I say Kansas City, third down, if they get it to third and it's 3rd and 7+, Kansas City is actually really good in this situation, and San Francisco is not as great. Even though San Francisco ranks 5th on third down, Kansas City ranks 11th. Kansas City has the second best sack rate on third down in the league, only behind San Francisco. San Francisco is 15th in adjusted sack rate, so there's a clear advantage for Kansas City in that regard. So when they're in a clear pass rushing situation, Kansas City should be able to take advantage. Kansas City is ranked 11th in sacks, but they're only 26th in pressure, which this has me thinking that this is why San Francisco can have success early in the down. So if it's first, second down, because Kansas City's only 26th in pressure because they're trying to defend the run, they're not going after the quarterback as much. But when they're allowed to go after the quarterback more often, then they can really get after it. So I think 26th in pressures, that is probably saying that Kansas City, only when they're in a clear passing situation, they're good at rushing the quarterback. So for San Francisco, you want to stay out of those. And for Jimmy G, his rating drops down to 68.7 when he's under pressure. So if Kansas City does get into those situations, they can have success. And again, going back to it, the weakness of the drop back pass game for San Francisco. That is their weakness on offense, if there is one. The pass rushing matchups, Chris Jones and Clark. Those are two players that obviously have the biggest impact on the defensive line for Kansas City. Clark is the right end more often than not, so he'll take on Joe Staley, which I'm intrigued to see if Clark moves to the other side because McGlinchey has been the weakness more often than Staley. McGlinchey has allowed 5 sacks, which is the most of San Francisco's offensive line, and Staley he's been the best offensive lineman for San Francisco as he's been for a majority of his career. So watch out for that as well. If you're watching anything on third down, watch for the middle of the field defense, but also watch for where's Chris Jones and where is Frank Clark? Is Frank Clark on the right? Is he on the left? Is he facing Staley or is he facing McGlinchey? Because I feel like if Clark's facing McGlinchey, he'll have more success than facing Staley. And he has had 6 sacks in 4 games. So he could be a big factor, but we'll have to see what San Francisco's plan is to defend him. I also think Chris Jones, Kansas City will line him up over Person rather than Tomlinson. Tomlinson's a pretty good guard, ranking 20th by PFF. Garland ranks 12th at center, but Person ranks 33rd. So I feel like if Chris Jones is lined up over either side, it will be over the right side rather than the left side, and I think Kansas City can have success there. So, summing up that side of the ball before we go to comments, first and second down. San Francisco, I think, will have success with their play calling, their play action, their motion, their run game on first and second down, which should keep them out of third down and longs. But if they get into third down and longs, that's where Kansas City has the advantage. Kansas City also has the advantage in red zone. I do believe that this is a really good matchup between two great coaches in Spags and Shanahan, but I do give Shanahan the advantage based off both history and based off current production. I do think San Francisco will have this advantage on the offensive side of the ball more often because they'll be able to throw to the tight end, they'll be able to throw to the running back, but they may find it more difficult to throw to receivers in the inside of the field because I think Spagnuolo will do a good job of defending that. But I think where San Francisco will have the most success is running the ball and the play action and the motion plays off of that, which is the key to San Francisco's offense for most games, not only this Super Bowl. So I do expect San Francisco to score over 20 points. I do expect them to get closer to 30 than 20 points in this game. But I do think Kansas City has an opportunity to create pressure on Jimmy and possibly create 1 or 2 turnovers or a couple of sacks in this game that could turn the tide of this game. I don't think Kansas City is necessarily expecting them to shut down San Francisco, but if they can get a couple of big plays and big stops or force field goals, they have an opportunity to win. So that's the sum up of that side of the ball, and take all that information as you wish on that side of the ball. If you have any questions, let me know.